Hello my dear friends, you're on the Military Summary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in Ukraine on the 18th of March of 2023. Today we have a lot of very interesting updates, so let's start. First of all, I would like to say that, as you can see, the Russians were forced, or maybe they just took a decision to change their tactic. We haven't seen any progress on the ground for a very long time, to tell the truth. Yes, the Russians, of course, the main battlefield is Bakhmut and Avdiivka, and the Russians are pushing in direction of industrial zone from the north. They're trying to push the Ukrainians from the south. There are very heavy clashes in the vicinity of Grigorievka, Bogdanovka, Orekhovo-Vasilievka, but as we can see, there are no changes on the ground. Furthermore, the Ministry of Defense reported that Bakhmut or Donetsk front line is the only front line where the Russians still uses storm operations. When talking about Kupiansk front line, Liman, Kherson, South Donetsk front line, the Russians are just using their artillery forces and air forces to bomb and missile the Ukrainians. So, furthermore, if you take a look at this map, during the previous day, the Ukrainian sources published a video of another convoy of Ukrainian soldiers that, not just soldiers, but completely new weapon vehicles from the Western countries in the vicinity of Konstantinovka, and this convoy was heading in direction of Bakhmut. And we understand that this convoy was heading in Bakhmut for unblocking of this town. So the Russians understand that soon the Ukrainians are going to start their counter-offensive operation to unblock this town, to unblock the heart of this operation in the battle for Donbass. The Ukrainian sources are saying that the Ukrainians are planning to start counter-offensive operation on the Thursday of the next week. The weather is fine. If you remember, right exactly at the same time, a year ago, the Russians were storming Mariupol. So now the weather is fine. So the Ukrainians are able, the bad weather passed, the period of the bad weather passed, the quality of the ground became better, and now the Ukrainians can start the unblocking process. And the Russians understand that they need to break this operation, they need to ruin the Ukrainian plans, and now they completely concentrated using their drones, using their missiles by attacking their very close towns to the front line. The Russians were attacking Kramatorsk during the previous 24 hours, and there were a lot of video and photo confirmation of explosions in that town. As you can see, there was a very big explosion in the vicinity of Kramatorsk during the previous 24 hours, and the Russians are saying that maybe they managed to destroy another ammo depot in this area, or maybe they destroyed another fuel depot in this area. If we take a look at Konstantinovka, there was another attack in this area for now. There are no piece information about what exactly the Russians were attacking, but of course we understand that the Russians were trying to attack the Ukrainian reserves or their forces or armored vehicles or something like this. Furthermore, the Russians continue attacking the Ukrainians in Zaporozhye area, and today they attacked this small residential area. This is something like a hotel. As you can see, there is a pool in this area. It's a restaurant, hotel, and the Russians are saying that this is the area where the Ukrainians, not just Ukrainians, where the Foreign Legion had their position. So it's like the place where they were living. So as you can see, this building is pretty damaged, and as you can see, there are a lot of photos. I believe that now these Foreign Legion forces are no longer able to use this position as their own home or something like this. Furthermore, the Russians attacked Novomoskovsk during the previous 24 hours, and as you can see, there were also very big explosion, and as a result of that attack, the Ukrainian lost another fuel depot in this area. And we know that Ukrainians uses Dnipro and Zaporozhye to supply and support their forces located on the border, on the combat line in Orekhov. And we know that possibly that Orekhov is one of the possible direction that Ukrainians are going to use for their greatest counter-offensive operation. So as you can see, the Russians took a decision to take a small pause, operational pause, to complete regrouping, to bring more ammo, to bring more shells, to fix the artillery system, to get close artillery system to the combat line, and they're completely concentrated on the Ukrainian backs town like Zaporozhye, Dnipro, Konstantinovka, Kramatorsk, Slaviansk, and of course Avdiivka and the vicinity of Avdiivka. For example, during the previous 24 hours, the Russians reported that they attack and destroy the headquarters of 110th Mechanized Brigade that were located in Toninka, and we know that there are very heavy clashes for these two towns. The Russians are trying to penetrate the south and to move and their main goal to meet the Russian forces that are moving from Novosilovka, Drugaya, Krasnogorovka in direction of Stepovo and Berdichi to encircle Avdiivka. We see that they have some success, and they haven't still encircled this town, but I believe that they will continue their movements very slowly, step by step, but I believe that sooner or later they're going to encircle Avdiivka and to complete this horrible, terrible story of bombing this town. Furthermore, as you can see, the Russian sources published of another HIMARS attack. This is the HIMARS rocket that was sent from Archertina. This town is located on the northwest from Avdiivka, this area, and furthermore the Russians added another icon in the vicinity of a small town by the name of Khartsysk that located on the east from Makeivka, this area. And as a result of those attacks from HIMARS, the Ukrainians destroyed a few buildings in residential area. The Russians are saying that there were casualties among civilians. I believe that the Ukrainians were trying to target some military places and places where the Russian forces are deployed or something like this. There were no updates about any losses among the manpower of the Russian forces. And the Russian soldiers on the ground and telegram channels haven't reported about any losses of the Russians in this area. So we'll see whether there were or not. For now, we don't have any information about that. So now let's talk about the situation on the ground and about the things on the ground. So let's return back to Bakhmut one more time. As we discussed, the Russians are pushing all over the front line, but to tell the truth, they're pushing but not as an offensive state. They're pushing as a defense state of their operation. So when talking about Donetsk front line, the Ministry of Defense reported that the Russians were using storm operation, artillery attacks operation, and air forces attacks. And as a result of combination of all those types of attacks, the Ukrainians lost 120 soldiers, 4 armored vehicles, and 3 artillery systems, 2 Uragan and 1 D-30 howitzer. As you can see, the level of the losses in the vicinity of Bakhmut have been reduced. Very difficult to determine what was the reason of this decrease, but as I told you, I believe that the Russians took a decision to be a little bit more careful, because for sure the Russians can't know whether the Ukrainians are planning to unblock Bakhmut or it's just the game. But anyway, to be a little bit more careful is not a very bad point. I think it's the good thing. They need to be careful if they want to complete the battle for Bakhmut and if they don't want to be defeated in the vicinity of Bakhmut. Now let's move to Liman, and the Russians are saying that during the previous 24 hours there was just artillery attacks and air forces attacks of the towns like Terny, Nevskaya, Dibrovo, Yampolovka. This is Dibrovo, and this is Grigorovka, this is Yampolovka. And as a result of those combinations of those attacks, like artillery and airstrikes, the Ukrainians lost 100 soldiers, 2 armored vehicles, and 1 artillery system Gvozdika. Furthermore, as you can see, we can say that the level of the losses is almost the same level, but also a little bit less than the losses during the previous day, than like usual losses, a little bit less. For example, yesterday the Russians reported that Ukraine lost 70 soldiers. So you can see it's like 2 days in a row when the Russians on Liman front line also took a decision to change their tactic and to be a little bit more careful. Furthermore, I'm not saying that they took a decision like to be more careful. Maybe there are problems with logistic. Maybe it's like they managed during the previous months, they managed to spend all the artillery shells and so on, and now they need just to make small operational pause to fulfill everything they have, and after that they will be able to restore the previous level of the pressure, and they will complete their goals on this front line. When talking about Kupiansk front line, there are no changes on this in this area. The Russians were using just they were attacking the towns like the Russians were using just artillery attacks. According to the Ministry of Defense, they didn't use any storm operation. They didn't use any aircraft attacks. The Russians were attacking Dvurechna, Sinkovka. The Russians were attacking Kotlarovka, and the Russians were attacking Stelmakhovka in the south. And as a result of those artillery duels, the Ukrainians lost 60 soldiers and 3 armored vehicles. As you can see, there are no losses among artillery systems from the Ukrainian side as well. Furthermore, if we're talking about the previous 24 hours, the Ukrainians haven't lost even a single tank, so this also means something. And now let's go to the South Donetsk front line. Sorry for such a mess, going from one front line to another. As you can see, the Russians continue their attacks in this area, and they continue bombing the Ugledar using every single kind of weapon they have. And as a result, the Russians are saying that during the previous 24 hours, they were using artillery attacks and air forces attacks. And they were attacking the towns like Ugledar, Novomikhailivka, and the Russians were attacking the town Livadne and the town by the name of Orekhov. And as a result of those attacks, the Ukrainians lost 50 soldiers and just 2 armored vehicles. So as you can see, there are no changes of the level of the losses from the Ukrainian side. So we can see that the picture haven't been changed in comparison with the previous days. And the same story about Kherson. The Russians continue their artillery duels. There is a very rich spy network in this area. And as a result of work of combination of spy network and artillery systems, the Ukrainians lost 25 soldiers, 4 armored vehicles, and 2 artillery systems, also without any changes on the ground. Now let's go to the deployment map, because there are important updates in this area. And first, let's talk about Avdiivka. The Ukrainians understand that they are in very big trouble. As you can see, the deployment map has been updated, and if we take a look at this from this perspective, we see that the Avdiivka is already encircled. At least there is operational encirclement. So that's why the Ukrainians deployed some forces in this area. And first of all, they deployed newly created 23rd Mechanized Brigade. This brigade was completely trained in the Western countries, in NATO countries. This brigade is filled with Western weapon, Western armored vehicles. So as you can see, this brigade is located in Pokrovsk, and it's some kind of strategic reserves. Maybe the Ukrainians are going to use these strategic reserves for unblocking of Avdiivka. We discussed the situation about Krasnogorovka many times, and in my previous videos I told you that at the beginning of special operation, the Russians managed to enter Krasnogorovka. This is not the first time when the Russians entered Krasnogorovka. They did this in the previous year. But then the Ukrainians made a very effective counter-offensive operation, and the Russians were forced to step back in direction of Novosilovka-Drugaya. So maybe the Ukrainians are going to repeat the same story these days as well. Furthermore, the Ukrainians deployed another 36 Corps Brigade in the vicinity of Severna to stop the Russian progress in the vicinity of Pervomaiska. As you can see, this front line has been stabilized in this area. It's very difficult for the Russians to continue their penetration operation in direction of Tonenka, and I believe it will take time before they're able to do this. Something tells me that maybe the Russians are able to achieve some progress in the vicinity of Krasnogorovka even faster than in the vicinity of Vodyane. But who knows? We'll see, and I believe that the next upcoming week will give us more updates and more changes on the map. And of course, there are some changes in the vicinity of Bakhmut. The Ukrainians deployed their 92nd Brigade, or at least some unknown battalion of 92nd Mechanized Brigade, in the vicinity of Khromovo. As you know, there are very heavy clashes for the small town Khromovo. Furthermore, as you can see, the Western source map has been updated, but this map shows not the correct information. The Russians control the south part, but it doesn't change the entire picture. So the Russians are pushing in direction of this Khromovo, and there are very heavy clashes. And as you can see, some sources were saying that the Russians have already entered this forest line. Some sources are saying that Ukrainians managed to push the Russians back. But the most important part for the Ukrainians is this one, the road N32. This is the most important part that Ukrainians are trying to hold. Why is that? the same story as we discussed just at the beginning of this video, the photo and video confirmation that Ukrainians have already prepared some convoys with some modern Western weapon that will be redeployed in the vicinity of Bakhmut. And they need this road. Of course, this bridge is destroyed, but this is not a problem. This is not a barrier, because if you remember, first the Ukrainians destroyed the bridge in the vicinity of Romova, but later they managed to restore by creating the pontoon bridge. So the same story they can repeat on the road N32. First they destroyed, but I believe that they're able to build pontoon bridge without any problem. Furthermore, if you know, Germany, as far as I know, and United States of America provided the Ukrainians with a weapon, with the armored vehicles that can build bridges very fast. So this is not a problem. So the Ukrainians destroyed this bridge, but just to be on the safe side, and as soon as they need this bridge, they will restore this bridge very fast and immediately. And then they will push as much as possible, as much as they can, of their forces in this direction. When talking about the Russians, yes, they took a decision to slow down, to stop a little bit, to think for a while. And don't forget that if we compare positions of the Ukrainians and positions of the Russians, don't forget that the Ukrainians are located on the hills. So Minkovka, Orekhovo-Vassilyevka, Grigorovka, Bogdanovka, Kanal, Chasov Yar, all these towns are located on the hills. And when talking about the Russians, they are in the lowland, and this is not very good. The Russians control just a few hills, and I believe that first thing that Ukrainians are going to do is to push the Russians from these hills, and all these hills are located in the vicinity of Orekhovo-Vassilyevka and Zaliznyánska. So I expect that first the Ukrainians will try to attack in this area, and we'll see whether the Russians are able to stop the Ukrainians or not. And after that, they will push, push, and push. So we'll see. The next week is going to be, I believe, maybe not the final week, but at least the next week will be the first page of the end of the story of Bakhmut. Sooner or later, Bakhmut is going to or fall, or the Ukrainians are going to push the Russians back. I believe that Bakhmut is going to fall. Furthermore, if you remember, we on the Military Summer channel, we made a small poll where we were asking whether the Russians are going to take Bakhmut before the 1st of April, or the Russians are going to take Bakhmut after the 1st of April. And there was a third question that do you believe that Ukrainians are able to hold this town as long as possible? And the majority of the subscribers of Military Summer channels think that the Russians are able to take Bakhmut before the 1st of April. So we'll see whether we understand the situation correct or not, because to tell the truth, I also believe that the Russians are able to do this before the 1st of April. So we'll see. And that's it for today. Military Summer channel reminds to condemn any violence in Ukraine. Thank you for watching, subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.